Today's presentation is on the respiratory system of livestock animals. We will talk a little bit about those connections to also pets such as dogs and cats, and additionally human beings, because there are some things in common that we all share that help us understand the science. Let's begin with the purpose of the respiratory system. The real job is to provide oxygen to the tissues. Additionally, the respiratory system needs to remove carbon dioxide from the body so it doesn't become poisonous. And as an added bonus, our respiratory system helps us control our body temperatures, eliminate waste toxins that are airborne, helps with voice production, and cleans the air before it enters the inner body. This is a picture of the respiratory system of cow. I think you can see some of the main parts, and part of the reason I like this diagram is it shows where the veins and arteries go. We recently just studied the circulatory system, so this will help you kind of understand what's happening there. It takes a lot of circulation of blood throughout the animal's body to keep it healthy, and that includes in the respiratory system. You'll notice the white tube, if you will, coming down the trachea, going down into the lungs. The lungs are really pretty far forward, from the digestive system, and so they're right there in the front part of the body. We compare this with the human respiratory system, and we see some similarities. We see the trachea again, we see the lungs, again towards the front of the body, if you will, connected to the mouth where air is brought in. Now let's take some notes on the components of the respiratory system and look at them one at a time. We'll kind of start from the outside and work in. Really, the respiratory system begins with the nostrils, those external openings where air is brought into the body. Those nostrils are connected to the nasal cavity. That nasal cavity connects to the mouth with both the hard and the soft palate. And if you look closely at this diagram, you can see that those are kind of towards the back of the mouth. You can see that we have an esophagus as well as a trachea. For the most part, the esophagus carries the food down, but we do have some air that goes through as well. Other components of the respiratory system include the pharynx, the epiglottis, the larynx, and the trachea. The trachea is really that windpipe. We just briefly talked about that. I always joke that it's similar looking to a vacuum cleaner hose and that it has kind of rings around it. The larynx is in charge of being the voice box for animals. It actually controls your rate of breathing a little bit, but the big deal is to keep objects out of your lungs. And then we have the epiglottis, which is this little valve-like structure that helps your body know when you're swallowing food or when you're breathing. And then the pharynx, that common passageway for food and air, just typically not at the same time. These are the even more important components of the respiratory system. This is actually from the sheep species, and they made this like a silicone cast, if you will. So this kind of shows how the bronchus or the bronchi of the lungs branch out to become smaller and smaller, but then really focus on the air kind of transference, if you will, of putting that oxygen into the blood. So we begin with the bronchi, the two great big tubes that come in from the trachea and enter one side of the lung. You can kind of see where those split. They then get smaller into bronchioles. And finally, the very smallest bronchioles are called alveoli. And their main job is to exhaust carbon dioxide. Down in the lungs, what we really see are two very elastic organs that are filled with a pretty spongy material. They're kind of cone-shaped, and they're divided into lobes in almost every animal. The goal of lungs is to hold air in them, so lungs will always float in water. The primary purpose of the lungs is the gas exchange, so making sure that carbon dioxide has a way to leave the body and oxygen a way to come in. And all of this is kept separate from other systems with what we call the diaphragm. And I apologize for the spelling error there, but the diaphragm is a sheet of muscle located right beneath your lungs, and it separates your chest, where all the breathing happens, from your abdominal cavity. Now, we human beings typically have some respiratory problems that are a little bit different than animals, but we do have a few things in common. The bigger respiratory problems in human beings are caused by cigarettes and vaping, as well as working in different scenarios where there's a lot of particulates in the air, and those particulates can sometimes be harmful. In animals, we focus more on things like respiratory viruses, and then also pneumonia. There's a couple but a couple interesting pictures for you to look at here, both from a human perspective and from an agriculturalist. This first one is more on the human side, and these are lungs. The lung on the left is the lung of a smoker that from years and years of smoking. So you can kind of see that lung tissue should be that bright, healthy pink color, and then when we expose the lungs to a lot of chemicals, then that tends to happen on the left. We also want to make sure we pay attention to how those airways are affected. So this is kind of a view from a scope, if you will, and you can see what a non-smoker looks like. And then you can also kind of see that when smoking begins, there's some gunk, if you will. And then what the airways of a vapor look like. The important thing for you to realize about the vaping is, even though it looks normal, the surface of the alveoles have kind of a hardened shell in that scenario, and they actually have a really hard time absorbing, like actually making the oxygen enter the body. It goes into the airways, but it isn't absorbed into the bloodstream as well because of that hardened tissue. This is what happens when you or an animal gets pneumonia. Basically, if we look at all those lobes on the lungs, one of them then has some problems with the alveoli filling with fluid. And that fluid and inflammation is what we call pneumonia. Now, there are some important connections I want you to make as we connect this to our previous knowledge. We know that the circulatory system is what moves the blood around the body, but in order for that blood to always do its job, it has to have oxygen in it, which leads us to the respiratory system. And so that respiratory system is a system that's kind of isolated in one part of the animal, but works with the circulatory system to change and affect and keep healthy the whole animal. Let me know what your questions are. Have a good day.